Silver swords are boring, so here's a quick tutorial on how to make your power swords look epic. Welcome back to the Painter's Portal. I'm Dave, and in today's video I'm going to show you a quick tutorial on how to make your power swords look epic. We're going to be doing 3 colours: purple, green and red. Before we jump in, here's a kit list of everything you're going to need in order to follow along. So these are the paints that you're going to need if you want to follow along, and I've listed the paints needed for a green, a purple and a red power sword. And in this tutorial I'm also going to be using a size 1 and 2 brush from Orange Brushes, but you can use whichever brush is appropriate and you feel that you're comfortable working with. I'm going to be using a wet palette just to put my mixes on. It's really good to get used to working with a wet palette. You'll also need some paper towel for wicking away any excess paint. Here's an image showing each glaze layer and the mixing ratios for each stage. It might be a good idea just to screenshot this or make a note of these in your painting journal. I find it really useful to refer back to stuff visually, and that's going to help you. So as you can see, the swords have already been base coated with our lightest colour, which is Moot Green, Wild Rider Red and Cacophony Purple. We're going to be starting with the lightest colour and build towards the darkest on each blade, as I think that's the best option for beginners and it's the easiest for most people to understand when working with glazes. Before we start painting, there are going to be 2 key points to make note of. Firstly, we're going to be working with a thin glaze. This consistency is basically going to be 4 parts thinner, whatever medium you're going to use, to 1 part of the paint. And this is to give a very thin layer build up and enable us to build up smooth transitional layers. I'm going to demonstrate 2 parts thinner to 1 part paint and 4 parts thinner, just so you can quickly see. So I've loaded up the palette with 2 parts of the Lamy medium and 4 parts of the Lamy medium. So if we take the part that's thinned 4 parts, you can see it's quite thin there. Whereas if we take the part that's 2 parts, you can see that it's thicker. Secondly, it's important that we dab off the excess paint onto a paper towel. This is to prevent overloading the brush and getting unwanted pooling. When we paint the sword, we're going to start with the brush at the lightest end, moving towards the point which we want to be the darkest. Using our glaze mixture, we're going to progressively move about 1mm closer to the darkest point with each layer, and this will give us a really nice smooth transition between the shades. I'm going to start the first layer 3/4 of the way down the blade, and you can see from the reflection where I've started and where I'm working towards. You can immediately see the process we're going to follow, and we're going to follow this for between 6 to 12 layers depending on the thickness of your glaze. The thinner glaze will result in more layers but a smoother transition. So obviously if you want to do a quick one, do it thicker, but you have to bear in mind that that transition is potentially going to be quite stark. So we've applied the first layer and we've let it fully dry. Now I'm going to be starting about 1mm lower as I described, and just pull it up towards the tip and down towards the hilt. Turn it over and do exactly the same. Find a place to start that's slightly lower, and again just pull it towards the darkest point of the hilt right there. So now you can see the transition is starting to take effect even just after 2 layers. As we're going towards that dark point at the top, flip it over, we can see there's a little bit of pooling there, which is okay because that's going to be in the darker section. So we're going to go back, we're going to wick off the paint, and we're going to pick a point to start again about 1mm lower. I'll go from there and pull towards the tip. Same on the other side, and pull towards the hilt, and just repeat the process. That's all we're doing during this period. We're just going to pull towards that dark point, start slightly lower and pull down towards the hilt. Again, 3 layers in, you can see I'm going to pick a point slightly further up and I'm going to go down, and we're just going to progressively build up these layers. It's as simple as that. It's just practice and it just takes time. So I think you can really start to see now, as I work further down the blade, I'm almost at the halfway point, but you can really start to see the difference in gradient of colour, and it's starting to take on that light to dark transition pretty nicely. About that halfway point is where we're going to hopefully get a really smooth colour. Now we're going to move on to glaze mix number 2, starting at a point roughly halfway down the blade. You should be able to see those transitions really nicely from the first steps. And bringing this next stage, we're going to be starting at about where the smoothness kind of becomes one solid block of colour now. So, the colours that we're going to be using, again, 4 parts Lamy medium, and for the green we're going to use a 50-50 mix of Warpstone Glow and Caliban Green. For the red, it's a 50-50 mix of Evil Sun Scarlet and Mephiston Red. And for the purple, it's a 50-50 mix of Genestealer Purple and Phoenician Purple. All of these can be referenced back at the beginning, make a note of them, and it's just really easy to just get these mixes on your wet palette so you can just swap in and out if needs to be. When the colours start to become darker, you may notice that you've pushed the transition too far, and that'll create an obvious dark line. If this happens, we can go back to our wet palette, refer to the previous step, and just repeat the process until you transition through. It really is just about getting those nice thin layers on there. Remember, you need to be getting gradually closer to the shadows areas. Don't constantly pass over the same part of the blade, or the transition point will become too dark. For this stage, I'll be looking at putting between 6 and 8, possibly 10 passes. Again, this entirely depends on how much you've thinned it. With the 4 parts Lamy medium to the 1 part of our 50-50 mix, it's probably about the right shade for me with practice to do about 8 passes. If you thin it thinner, just work your way down that blade and just do those nice transitional layers until you're really happy with one smooth colour near the darker end. So with about 6 to 10 passes of that colour, we're going to be seeing this kind of thing. It's a really nice smooth transition. We're going to be moving on to glaze layer number 3, which is going to be starting roughly 2/3 to 3/4 of the way down the blade, where the previous transitions become one smooth colour again, just like in the previous step. And again, we're going to be moving towards the darkest point of the blade. The colours in this stage are going to be either 4 to 5 parts Lamy medium, whatever you're comfortable with now at this stage. And for the green, it's Caliban Green. For the red, it's Mephiston Red. And for the purple, it's Phoenician Purple. This darker paint has got more pigment in it than the lighter colours, so that's why I say 4 to 5 parts Lamy medium. You may be more comfortable thinning it a little bit more. Try adding a drop of Lamy medium there. The medium's really good because it helps the paint flow better. It's always easier to do more thin layers for a smooth blend than to do the darker colours too soon. So now we're moving on to glaze mix number 4. This will be our darkest tone of each colour, plus the darker colour that works alongside that. So you're going to get your different complementary colours working with each. So for each colour, I'm going to be using a 50-50 mix of Caliban Green with Abaddon Black, the 50-50 mix of Mephiston Red with Corn Red, and a 50-50 mix of Phoenician Purple with Abaddon Black. For these final colours, we're going to be starting approximately 4/5 of the way down the blade, so pretty much near the final shadow point. Don't forget that if your transition becomes too hard, we can refer back to the stage before. You can really see a nice transitional colour between the lightest point and the darkest point. So there's an option now to work on the lightest parts of the sword just before we do an edge highlight. But we're going to be using the same edge highlight mix, but it's going to be really thin, and I'm probably only going to do 1 or 2 passes of this colour. So for the green, it's going to be a moot green with dawn yellow, thinned quite heavily. This is completely optional. You don't have to do this. I think that the light tone of the colour is pretty good, but I do sometimes like to pass over with this once. So for the edge highlighting stage, we're going to create a 50-50 mix again. It's the optional one, but this time we're going to be doing the 50-50 mix of the base colour plus the lightest colour, and we're going to be slightly thinning this with water, but I don't want it to be anywhere near as thin as glaze consistency. You know, the paint wants to stick to the brush more. We're still going to wick some off, but again, I don't want it to overspill on or pool onto the rest of the sword, so we're going to turn the edge of the paintbrush sideways. We're just going to brush that paintbrush across the highest points right along the edge and just go back. I like to probably take 3 or 4 passes and just build that up transitional. I don't want to go in too heavy, and I can just change it as I go. Just build up those really nice layers. Now you can see the bright edge highlight makes those darker parts really stand out. Once you're at the tip of the blade and you've got a really nice edge highlight on there, I think it stands out really nice. So for the centre line, I'm going to use exactly the same mix as the edge highlight. It's going to be the 50-50 mix of colour and light colour. I'll be removing a lot of the paint. I do this as kind of like a dry brush. You know, I'm only going to feather along the highest part of the sword, right? Because this bit's the most nerve-wracking. You can, if you want, do a straight line as if you were painting an edge highlight on another model, so you can feather a straight edge down, or you can turn the brush sideways and do it. If it's a really sharp point on a blade, you should be able to use the edge of the paintbrush and just run it down. Now for an added little extra to create some interest, you can use the same edge and centre highlight mix to create reflection lines across the surface of the blade. This stage is entirely optional, but if you like the look of it, give it a go. I start at the centre along the raised centre line and pull towards the edge. It just adds a little more visual interest when you move the model around. If you follow the steps, take your time, practice using thinned paint mixes, I think you'll be really surprised how easily you can create stunning and visually interesting power swords and blades. And there you have it, 3 finished power swords in your colour of choice. So, now you've seen how we painted them, let us know in the comments below which one's your favourite. We want to see those power swords, so tag us on social media. If there's any other colours that you're interested in seeing, any other power weapons as well, let us know. Don't forget to like, subscribe, all the usual stuff. And until next time, enjoy.